Well, here we are. And this is where we've always been, but then again, we're not in the same place that we used to be. Good to have you. Good to have you here with me. Before I go any further, I'd like you to use the comments section on this particular video to weigh in. Tell us where you're from. Don't just tell me. Tell us where you're from and what it's like where you are. In the country that you were in whatever of the 50 American states you're in. If there's anybody here from northern Italy or from Iran or from China, let us know. Tell us what it's like. You know, I don't have the spirit right now to give you some peppy lecture about how to do triple tonguing on the harmonica. That lesson, the last lesson I uploaded was one I did in the period just before the New Year, and I had a bunch of them answering questions for people. Different spirit right now. We're in a different place. And I've been trying to think about what would be the right approach, and it seems to me that the best thing to do right now might be to set a goal or two and to think about how blues might have something to teach us about how to deal with this present moment. But actually, I find myself always, in these kind of moments, I find myself thinking about a book that the harmonica player, a good friend of mine, Jason Ritchie, gave me the day that I got out of intensive care. It was exactly 20 years ago. It was in March of the year 2000, so it was almost exactly 20 years ago to the week. And I had gone down to Florida. I had not seen Mr. Satan, Sterling Magee, for a while, and I went down and happened to hang out with Jason. He was playing a gig with the Knuckle Busters band that he was in. I think that was the name. And he got me up on stage. And I was really excited before I got on stage. I was watching him play, and I was still smoking at that point. It was a stupid habit. I haven't smoked in years, but I was smoking at that point. And I had like 3 Dunhills in the hour before getting on stage with Jason. Just watching him, thinking, he's really good. This guy's he always was good, but he's gotten suddenly like better than me, or like, and of course he's gone on to achieve fame and fortune. And I got on stage and we played like an up-tempo boogie. Something like that. About 3 minutes, back and forth. And I went from 0 to 100 in car terms really quick. When I came off stage, I had a big, dark thing splayed across my chest. I had a hard time breathing, which apparently is what people are saying right now. If you get COVID-19, if you get coronavirus, you have a hard time breathing. Your chest feels like it's really tight. Well, that's exactly what I felt like. And I ended up going to the car, his van, sitting there for a while, and then he took me to the emergency room, where they gave me a test, and it was, they gave me a test right away. It's hard to get these tests in America right away, but they gave me a test right away. I mean, tests for coronavirus. They gave me a test right away, and it was in the gray area. They said, we're going to keep you overnight for observation. I said, really? Well, I went unmedicated all night long, and in the morning, a woman came in, running in. It was their billing person, and she said, how are you going to pay for this? I said, pay for what? Your test came back, and you've had a heart attack. I said, a heart attack? She said, you've had a heart attack. But that was before any doctor came in telling me that I had a heart attack. She said, how are you going to pay for this? And so that's where I was. Doctor came in. I had, and suddenly I went from being a guy who was a former like marathoner to a guy in intermediate intensive care for 3.5 days with what turned out to be a $43,000 bill for the whatever they did. We ended up negotiating it down later to about half of that, but it was just, it's like everything fell apart. 3.5 days later, I got out of the hospital, and Jason took me back to his place, and I was just, the world I was in was not the world I had been in 4 days earlier. Everything was new. I was frightened. He gave me a book. It was all underlined by his mom. And it was by a woman named Pema Chodron. The title was When Things Fall Apart, Heart Advice for Difficult Times. The perfect book at the perfect moment. I still have it, with all of Jason's mother's underlinings, which the underlines are great, but I mean, if they weren't there, it was good to have that. It's a book that you should think about going out and getting. Chodron, Chodron, When Things Fall Apart. A Tibetan Buddhist book, and she talks about relaxing into the fundamental groundlessness. That's one of the Buddhist concepts. I never studied Buddhism, but I did read this book many times and took its principles to heart. In fact, I went out after that and bought every single book in the spirituality New Age section that had the word heart in it. Heart. It's learning how to relax into the fundamental groundlessness, because after all, you know, we like to get ground underneath us. We like to say we got a bank account that's okay, and the person in our life who loves us, and we got our health. And you can go out and, if you got a little money, go out and hang out with friends, or go to a bar and drink. Can't even go to a bar now. And I was just talking to a friend in Pennsylvania. They're not selling liquor anymore. So everything's been taken away. What's the best way to respond to this situation when we have a dark and uncertain future? What does blues say about that? Well, I've been thinking for many years about something called the blues ethos, the blues sort of ethic, the blues way of living life. And there's a number of things that compose it. There's not just one thing, but I'm going to give you a few, and these are principles that you might think about, apart from that Buddhist idea that you might take a deep breath and just relax where you are and reconnect with your heart and recognize that things are what they are. You can't change them. That's Eckhart Tolle and the power of now. Best thing to do is just don't try to run away, because that's our natural impulse. Try to be exactly where you are. And this dovetails to some extent with what I'm going to talk to you about in a minute with the blues writer Kalamu Ya Salam. You need a little... So the blues ethos. One part of the blues ethos is never quit. Even when you're tempted to quit, if you gotta quit, gotta give up, don't do it for too long. Give up, surrender completely. Everything's effed. I have to be careful. I can't say, because YouTube has stuff that will pick that up. Everything is forked at this point. Stick a fork in it, we're done. Don't give up. So that's because the folks who invented blues, the African-American folks in the Deep South, knew that if you whined when hardship, some people think blues is whining, but actually there's a lot of toughness, spiritual toughness in the blues. That's something I learned with Sterling Magee, Mr. Satan. He used to always tell me, you'll live through it. Ha! That was his favorite phrase, you'll live through it. It took me a long time to figure that out. I'd complain about a girlfriend, and to him that seemed probably trivial. But he complained about women too. He said, you'll live through it. Many years later, I thought about his childhood in Mississippi as a black boy in Mississippi. Born in 36, so he's coming up in the 40s, early 50s. Emmett Till happens in 55 when Sterling Magee is 19. All that kind of stuff is around. You'll live through it would be a good philosophy. It would say, it might be a good way of pushing away the stuff that's basically trivial. So, but then again, right now, we don't know if we're going to live through it. You got to relax into that. Can't control it. Doesn't mean you do stupid things, but you got to accept that. But you can be cussed in the best way. Spiritual toughness is a part of the blues life. I write about this actually in a book that I've got coming out in the fall. I'll tell you a blues story. Actually, I'm going to tell you the blues story that's in the book. That's a great story. Bill Howland Mad Perry. You want to know what the blues ethos of spiritual toughness is? But also understanding that if you mire yourself in the miseries of the present moment, instead of relaxing into them and making shrewd decisions, then you're going to preclude the possibility of a sudden reversal. So one element of the blues ethos is looking out for the possibility that what looks horrendous and bad right now might have a silver lining. It's a Buddhist principle, converting straw into gold. Might be that this is the 6-month period when you woodshed in a deep way because you're trapped at home. It might be a half hour a day, an hour a day on the harmonica, every day. And you might, 2 years from now, you might say, you know what, turned out to be a really good thing. So reframing. Let me tell you Bill Howland Mad Perry's story. He came to my my blues literature class 5 or 6 years ago. Great blues man. His father owned he was a bootlegger, and owned like a juke joint in Mississippi. And Bill's fantastic. He came with his daughter Sharo Perry, to my class. He had recently lost most of his sight. This is a guy who could see everything. Suddenly, the next day, he's just, I don't know what it was, and he's basically 90% blind. But he seemed fine in terms of his spirit. And I was amazed at that. How does somebody let go of his sight and remain kind of happy and looking forward? Optimistic, right? Sort of looking forward. Like optical, you're optician. Optimistic means you're sort of forward-looking. How could he remain forward-looking if he was blind? And I told him about that. We'd been studying the blues ethos. He goes, well, I got a story about that. And then he told the following story. He said, I was out west many years ago with Little Richard and his band. And Little Richard fired me from the band. We were in L.A., he said. And one morning I get up, and Little Richard has fired me from the band. And he's done that by leaving without me. So I am the hotel room. I got to check out. And I got no gig, and I'm in L.A. And I got $1 in my pocket. And I said, what? He just left. He goes, he left me. I said, what'd you do? He said, well, I didn't feel too good. And everybody in the class laughed. I'll tell you in a minute about humor. He said, I didn't feel too good. And we all kind of chuckled. And I said, well, so he said, the first thing I did is I bought breakfast for 90 cents. I thought, okay. So, and then he said, and then I took my guitar, because he had his guitar and I guess some suitcase, and I got it on the highway and I started walking. And I thought, wow. Didn't just shrivel up and die, didn't just panic, which he would have been entirely acceptable. Got it on the highway and started walking. And I said, well, what happened then? And he said, somebody who had seen one of our shows, had seen me with the band during our residency in L.A., picked me up and gave me a lift back to his house. And I stayed there for a week, worked a little bit, made a little money, and I got enough to get me back to Chicago. So what's the lesson there? Well, one lesson is he dealt with reality. He didn't try to hide. Second lesson is he filled his belly. So, you take what resources you have and you apportion them. But the third, I think the really important, and he didn't just give up. When in a situation when a lot of people might have just been tempted to give up. Can't afford to. And then he got out on the highway. So he gave the world a chance. He gave luck, in a sense, a chance to show up. Now, the fact that it did show up is not guaranteed. But it's guaranteed not to show up if you don't maintain enough spiritual fortitude and presence of mind to put yourself in a position where it can show up. So that's number one. And those are all elements of the blues ethos. That sort of persistence. The karmic wheel is a part of the blues ethos. The idea that next time you see me, things won't be the same. The idea that I may be on my way down now and you think you're on your way up. But guess what? At some point that wheel's going to spin. And so it might be a good idea to help each other now instead of looking down on the people who are down and feeling any kind of spiritual priority over them. I remember many years ago, 1985, when I saw James Cotton at the Lone Star Cafe in New York. He was my hero. Cotton! This time I could play you some Cotton. Can't do Cotton now. James Cotton. I went up to the dressing room in the Lone Star Cafe. I met Johnny B. Gaden, his bass player. Great guy. Said, come on in, come to the dressing room. Suddenly I'm sitting at the table and there's James Cotton. I had a chance to meet him a couple of times later on. My buddy Deke worked with him, for him, drove him around for a while, knew him much better than I ever did. I didn't really know him, but this was the first time I'd actually met him face to face, although I'd seen him 10 years earlier when I was 16, and he changed my life. Seeing him live was one of those things. And so I said, Mr. Cotton, yeah, sit on down. I said, I don't know how long you're going to be in town the next day. And of course, traveling blues acts, they don't stay in town. They head out. I said, but I'll pay you, if I could get an hour of your time, I'll pay you whatever you want for a lesson. And you know what Cotton said to me? And I've kept it with the whole life, I've kept this, because it tells you all you need to know. He said, well, I'll show you what I know. You don't have to pay me, he says. But if you ever see me on the street and I need $1, you give me $1. And I thought, wow, Mr. Satan, Sterling Magee, used to say, you can't buy friendship, but you can damn sure make payments on it. That's kind of an example. It's like, and that was Cotton saying, I know I'm the star, and you're looking to me for something. Well, I'll show you whatever I know, but most of all, you and me are on the same level, and I could be down, below you. And if you ever see me on the street and I need $1, you give me $1. He's thinking ahead. I mean, he did so many beautiful things, and he gave me the teaching that I needed, that stayed with me my whole life. So I got a lesson. Does that make sense? He didn't have time to give me the lesson, but he gave me the lesson. And I've learned enough in the course of my life to recognize that. So that's good. Reframe. I got exactly what I needed. It was a real wisdom thing. Now, there's another thing going on, which is blues humor. So there's a guy that I really have loved. I never met him, although I emailed him once or twice, named Kalamu Ya Salam. Val Ferdinand was his Christian name, I guess. He was in the Black Arts movement. He's a poet. And he has a book called What is Life?, which has a section called The Blues Aesthetic. And he writes all in kind of all small case letters. Then he says the following. He's talking about blues humor. Rather than escape from reality, he says, when we fantasize, and by we he means black blues people, when we fantasize, it is based on a brutally honest recognition of reality. A reality, albeit clothed in a metaphorical grace. Thus, we laugh loud and heartily when every rational expectation suggests we should be crying in despair. The combination of exaggeration and conscious recognition of the brutal facts of life is the basis for the humor of blues people, which is real black humor. Thus we laugh loud and heartily when every rational expectation suggests we should be crying in despair. And you know, African-American survival strategy, I guess you'd say. Well, what's interesting is, by the time that I read that for the first time, I had already encountered that version of the blues ethos, which is to say, using harsh laughter to harden the pain, which Langston Hughes says. That there was something about the blues that always struck me as sad, sadder even than the spirituals, because the blues were pain-hardened with laughter. I used to complain when I was playing on the street with Mr. Satan. Back in the day, you know, just when we could play a harmonica and shake people's hands, and I was on the street, right, shaking. Imagine that. We wouldn't do that these days. In fact, if you're going to play the harmonica, better make sure you use some hand sanitizer when you come in from wherever you've been. Then you can play. Sterling, Mr. Satan used to say, well, I would complain about the girlfriends, and he would say, man, he said, I had so many wives die on me, I was thinking of opening a funeral parlor. And then he'd laugh. Now, I knew that he'd changed his name because he'd been so destroyed by a woman named Betty. If you've seen the Satan and Adam documentary, you've seen the picture of her. I didn't see that until later, but he would talk about this woman. And people would mention, yeah, he loved her. She was beautiful. The men in Harlem would make curves like she was really Venus-like, you know, and he nursed her to her death by her bedside. And we're talking a lot about death today, aren't we? Interesting how that works. But the blues has a lot to say about that. And so he said, I had so many wives die on me, I was thinking of opening a funeral parlor. That is what Salam said. Brutal recognition of reality. Love entails pain. People sometimes die. Sometimes people we love die. Blues knows all that. And then he uses laughter to harden it, push it away, control it, reshape it, repurpose it. That's the blues ethos. Blues is, for me, is never just about playing the harmonica, although that's an important thing, and that's what this channel's about. It's a philosophy of life. Now, it's one that I have amalgamated with the idea, with certain Buddhist ideas, but actually, you know, all that perennial, there's a sort of perennial wisdom. And the reframing is, wise people know how to reframe. So how can this help you? I hadn't really thought this through, but I do think that this is a place and time. So number one, this could turn out to be a place and time that makes a lot of people who've never had the blues in a deep way, that sense of real pain, real uncertainty, a loss of ground, an inability to a seeming inability to sort of control what you wanted to control or what you used to control, what you feel you need to control. high water blues, right? The big flood of 1927, and that led to a lot of great blues. So this may be a time when people end up writing amazing songs, but also when the audience for blues may turn out to have an incredible resurgence in the aftermath of all this. That's number one. Number two, you may find that you are social distance is out there, physical distance from others. You might be just alone. Now, I'm lucky. For now, I'm lucky. Got a living wife and a living son. I hope they hang in there. Let me pause for 1 sec. What we need, and I hope you'll think about this, I'm going to suggest after you've weighed in, if you've got a really funny, dark joke that could make us laugh, hopefully a harmonica player joke. I feel like there's a joke to be written. I have a video which I'll try to post a video of harmonica player jokes. Most of them involve people, pizza delivery, sort of status struggles with other musicians, all of whom have more status than the harmonica player. They involve destroying instruments. What do you call a harmonica player thrown into a harmonica thrown into a toilet from 20 yards? A good start. So those kind of jokes, but I'm feeling like there's got to be one now. Maybe one of those pizza delivery man jokes, and I hadn't thought this through. Let me put this on pause. I'm going to think of the joke, and I'll come back. Here's a harmonica player joke. So what's the difference between a pizza and a harmonica player? There's two differences, actually. People are always happy to see the pizza, and the pizza can't get coronavirus. That's pretty bad, right? Pretty bad. Okay, so you can do better, and I know you will, and we will laugh at people's various attempts. And maybe we'll vote, and I'll have a video where we all sort of agree that this is the best. We need a joke that takes right where we are, that acknowledges the brutal reality, and that somehow throws a harmonica into the mix, or a harmonica player into the mix. It's obvious we're not going to be doing a whole lot of busking in the next little while. I do think this is a period when we may not see a whole lot of terrorism, because there's just nobody to kill with that big old bomb. Anyway, I really don't know. How about a little music, and then we're done. We're done for today. Hope you enjoy this, and share it with your friends. That seems so pre-pandemic. Here's something a friend of mine said. He said, when we come back from the pandemic, nobody's going to shake hands. When we get to that point, nobody's going to shake hands. Here's what I think. I think that when we get through this, whenever that is, 18 months from now, I want you to think ahead, reframe. 18 months, 2 years, there will come a moment when we're all back and doing what we're doing and we're picking up the wreckage. I think there's going to be an incredible resurgence of people, of live music, of people wanting to be with each other, of music, of clubs. Maybe blues will be a part of that. I hope so. Maybe good time music. The harp can be a good time thing. Let me leave you with one final thing. This should be a period when you go into the woodshed. This is key of C harmonica, by the way. This should be a period when you go into the woodshed, and after you've taken care of all that other stuff, when you focus, give it half an hour, give it an hour, give it whatever time it feels to you like it needs a day. Maybe this is the period, the 10,000 hours period for the next 6 months. Maybe this is the period where if you're alone, you put in that 4 or 5 hours a day, day after day. What I'm going to suggest is that if you're thinking about doing that, and if I were a younger guy and alone in the way that I was in my mid to late 20s, I might actually think about something, and forced to sort of shelter in place, I might actually think about that. Record yourself today before you go and do that program, and then you'll hear a difference when you go back and listen 6 months from now, a year from now. Hope it's not that long. Anyway, that's all for me today. Hope you had a good time. See you down the road when they let us travel at some point in the future. Bye-bye.